Hey guys, what's going on? I'm Shorty and welcome to Storytime Part 2, where today I'll continue talking about my first-person shooters, or rather my experience with first-person shooters and how I got into them to begin with. Now, of course, if you haven't seen Part 1, you should probably go check that out first, as everything will make more sense that way. I'll put a link in the description. And as a side little note about the footage you're watching, this is a game I managed to recover from pretty early on. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was from right around the first week after the game came out. So you can see it, from my level and everybody else's level. And, well, I don't know about you guys. I mean, I hope you like it, and of course it's a decent gameplay. But for me, it's always actually very interesting to kind of like look at an old gameplay of mine and just kind of not just look at how I'm playing in terms of my accuracy and how unused to the game I was, but also kind of just look at how everybody else is playing. And, they're not going to the usual spots. Everyone's just a lot more free. Anyway, enough about that. So let me actually continue the story I was telling you about first-person shooters. And I'll basically cut off at right when I was telling you that I was a big fan of things like Unreal Tournament, Half-Life, Quake, and of course Counter-Strike, which was a mod for Half-Life. But the point I was trying to get across is that all those games were actually very massive and influential, especially for their time, because, unlike some of the first-person shooters that come out these days, like, I don't know, something like Homefront at the top of my head, that just came out and didn't really, people were excited about, but after a while, everyone seems to forget about. Well, those games weren't like that. Like, Half-Life, Quake, Unreal Tournament, they were all so important that, like, a ton of people played them for a very long period of time as well. And even when the next versions of those games came out, a lot of people actually said, well, never mind, screw that, we're just going to stick with the first ones. Because, for example, when Unreal released another version, people didn't like it so much and they stayed with the first one. When Half-Life released Half-Life 2, well, the multiplayer still didn't agree with a ton of people, so they kept playing the first one. And because of that, and because of all the culture that was, developed around those games, I suppose, they actually lasted a very, very long time, like years past what you would actually expect or probably see with any game these days. But the other interesting thing about all those games was that, the internet didn't really exist at the time. As in, it did exist, and you could definitely play online, but it wasn't the same thing. Like, today, you basically, jump on your PS4 or Xbox or PC, whatever you're playing on, and you just kind of go, oh, join online, and there's like, billions of people playing whatever it is. Well, not necessarily, but you get the point. And it's very easy. At the time, it wasn't quite like that, though. We had to improvise. It was actually more about playing with people, like playing in the same place with people. So you would either, agree to like go to a LAN cafe or something where you could all just meet up and play some games, or maybe, like, that's the thing. Like, it was even before laptops. That was the funny part, because, today everyone just brings, a laptop. To be honest, I don't know. I haven't really done these things in a while, but I would guess that, you just sit around the big room with a bunch of laptops and you can play anything you wanted. Back then, you'd have to, like, lug around, like, some big PC tower, which, would look very powerful, but of course would have, the power of a small anthill with very, very, very underproductive ants. And, of course, don't forget about your monitors. I mean, monitors today, nice and slim. I mean, this is awesome. I can fit, like, 2 of them on my little table without any trouble. Back then, your monitor was like, something you could use in the gym as added weights for, when steroids weren't quite giving you and you get the point. Like, it was a completely different time. And I guess because of all of that, because people kind of just grew up with those things, like, especially people in my generation, it was, I don't know, it felt very weird to let go. And it was kind of interesting to see, and I think Counter-Strike is actually the best example of that, because for anyone who actually played Counter-Strike, and if you didn't, you'll find this even funnier, I guess, but there were many versions. Like, for example, for anyone who played it, you'd know there's like 1.5, which was like this was the latest version of the earliest version. There was 1.6, which was like a slight leap forward, and they changed a bunch of things, but, with change, and, you guys know with Call of Duty, if someone changes something, a bunch of people are obviously not going to be happy about it. So back then, people were just like, well, never mind, we're going to stick with 1.5. And then you had the divided crowd between 1.5 and 1.6, and then finally Source came out. And even when Source came out, that's the funny thing, because if you compare Counter-Strike Source to, like, the original 1.5, we're talking about, like, generations of graphical difference. To the point where, no one can say, oh, this one they look the same. It's not even, like, the same leak. Like, they're... Anyway, the point was, it wasn't about that. People were still very excited about the original game, and they didn't want to let it go so easily. That's why 1.5 actually stuck around for a long time. And you have to realize that, like, I played Counter-Strike for years, and it never really got boring. Like, I played the same version for many years. I eventually swapped over to Source, actually. Well, actually, to be fair, I must say I was very, I was reluctant. All my friends were like, no, dude, you should try it out. And I was like, no, I don't want to switch. It's bad. And then they finally made me play it for a little bit. I got used to it, and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty fun. I like it. But I don't know, I stayed on those games for a long time. Like, it's not like I played a ton or something, but every time, I'd come back to a first-person shooter, I'd be like, okay, Counter-Strike Source. Yay, let's go. And the funny thing is, this is how I actually managed to skip over a game like, Call of Duty. Because at the time, like, to be honest, I did forget one more shooter, which was Medal of Honor. And Medal of Honor, for anyone who's played the recent ones, I haven't. I don't know. I haven't really heard anything amazing about Medal of Honor in years. But that was the funny thing, is because back then, the old World War type shooters were Medal of Honor, or that was the one we played. And at some point after Medal of Honor, Call of Duty 1 came out. And I remember, this is the funny part, because I never played Call of Duty 1, but I remember actually having, the CD in my room, because I either bought it at some point or someone bought it for me. I don't quite remember, but I remember having it. I never once actually, opened it up and installed it, just because it was like, meh, I didn't want to play it. Like, I felt like, oh, I already have Medal of Honor, why should I try? And people were like, no, dude, it's like way better than Medal of Honor. The point was, I skipped over Call of Duty up until Modern Warfare 2. And that was the funny thing, because every time I'd go back to something, it was like, oh, Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike felt nice. And to be honest, I kept playing Half-Life, for example, and Unreal Tournament for very, very, very long time. I don't know. I liked those games, though. They were very free. The funny thing is, if you actually look at Call of Duty, for example, like S&D, Search and Destroy, I mean, that came from the Diffusion. Like, from all my years when I played Counter-Strike, for example, and, we had some serious times. Like, we had clans, we did professional, well, not professional, like, we didn't get paid for it, obviously, but we would go into leagues, of course, not MLG at the time, but you had things like Cal, and I forget the names. There were so many of them. But it was really cool, because the same strategies were used. Like, everything you see today in, like, S&D, for example, and, like, professional gaming, like, that all existed, like, 10 years ago in Counter-Strike. If not, like, way before that in Counter-Strike. Just because, it was the exact same thing. Or at least S&D was. But then again, you had Capture the Flag, which came from Unreal Tournament, because that's where we all played Capture the Flag, and that was very serious. But anyway, enough about that. I think you guys kind of get my PC background in first-person shooters. Now, the one thing I haven't really talked about is, at one point I started, liking snipers, or at one point I started using snipers as a primary weapon, I guess. But we'll talk about it in the next episode. And actually, in the next episode, I'm going to tell you about how I swapped over from PC to console, and a few of the challenges that came along with that one. But I hope you guys liked this episode. Let me know what you thought. Drop a comment. And in case you were wondering about Gamma Academy, there's still plenty of time. There'll be another episode on Thursday on Gamma Academy. So wait for that, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.